So welcome to lesson 0 of personal finance course. It's really about how to think about providing for a financial future, and we'll get into some of the details on finance, but you kind of got to start with a bit of an introspective view in terms of how one faces the world and thinks about the interface between your own situation and the world situation, and begin to internalize some of the factors that affect financial outcomes, as opposed to just assuming that they are driven by external events that are unchangeable. And I think that's an important consideration. You kind of got to get that under your belt and get that part where you want it to be before worrying too much about the details of how finance actually works. So that's the way that this is structured. We're going to talk about individual agency and individual responsibility initially. Then we'll start to talk about some financial principles that underpin how investing works and how financial decisions should be properly considered, and then get more into the actual process of how investing in the stock market and bond markets actually works. That's a process that this is going to go through. I'd prefer that it was interactive, but I guess it's hard to get everybody together to sort of do this in a synchronized manner. So if I do it in an offline way like this, at least then what you can do is you can ponder some of the content in your own time, and then we can follow up with dialogue on a sort of as required basis. I would encourage you to do that though, because that's kind of where the learning is when you start to try to figure out how to personalize a lot of this stuff and make it germane to your own circumstances, as opposed to being generic financial theory, if you like. So start this off with just a little bit of a background check here. It's still easy to think that millionaires just happen, and they're all born or trust fund babies, however you want to call it. It turns out that's not statistically correct. Most millionaires start off with nothing, and over the course of their lifetimes, they accumulate wealth. Basically, what that says is that essentially anybody with normal faculties and an ability to work can improve their own situation to a greater or lesser degree, committed you on. I guess how much talent you've got at the end of the day. Talent does play a role in this. Probably worth just thinking about what constitutes wealthy. What does wealthy mean? It's not hard to get access to this data. It's all over the web, and it's quite depressing actually when you get into the data. To be considered in the top 10% of wealth in Canada in 2021, which probably isn't that much different now. So I mean, the number's probably gone up a little bit because of appreciation in real estate during COVID. That might be a bit of a temporary thing. That might level itself out a little bit as real estate resets in the next sort of year or two. It could come crashing down if interest rates don't get leveled off, and we'll talk about that later on. So it kind of doesn't matter. It's not the number itself isn't material, but what is surprising is that if you got a net worth of $840,000 or more in Canada in 2021, you were in the top 10% of wealthy people in the country. As we get into this, you'll find that 840,000 as a net worth is not a massive amount of money. Net worth is something that we'll come on to later, but essentially it's the difference between what you've got and what you owe. If you've got $1 million and you owe $999,999, you got a net worth of $1. So if you're up there at 840,000, you're in the top 10% in Canada. So anybody who owns a house outright is wealthy, essentially. We'll come on to wealth and what it really feels like later. But I think what's worth mentioning here is this idea of cash flow. You can be wealthy in terms of having a whole bunch of assets. You can have things that you can add them up and they can contribute to your net worth. But unless you can buy food with them, they're not much use. You got a bar of gold sitting under the table, you can't eat it. You can't pay a hydro bill with it. You can't pay a phone bill with it. You got to have cash. So in terms of becoming wealthy, I guess, assuming everybody starts with zero, step one is you got to have positive cash flow. That means you got to spend less than you earn. If you don't spend less than you earn, you're driving yourself into a debt position, which will then incur interest charges, which will take away more from your cash flow, and it's a negative spiral. If you generate more cash, spend less than you earn, then that creates headroom that you can start to save. You can start to put your money into assets that can generate more cash. That becomes a positive spiral. It's dead simple to say. It's harder to do because the temptation is always to live in the moment and spend on things. Everybody has that same sort of need for gratification. So that's how economies are driven. People spend money. That keeps businesses going. That keeps people employed. Yeah, it's human nature. What is an asset? It's a thing that has value. Hopefully, it's something that increases in value over time, or it can generate income. It takes time to get wealthy. This is it's a key factor. When you're young, you've got many economic cycles ahead of you. If you live a normal lifespan, you've got time to invest small amounts of money that can grow over time. You've got time for mistakes to happen. You've got time to recover from mistakes. You've got time for economies to rebound from recessions. Time is your friend, but it's also a critical resource that you should not waste. Just because you have time doesn't mean you should just let it evaporate before your very eyes. You got to have a sort of right attitude and behavioral set, which is where this idea of introspection comes from. You got to check your own behavior and your own attitudes to the world, and how you frame your decisions, and you kind of got to get that right. And then luck always helps. I would say never underestimate the value of luck, but also don't underestimate the extent to which you can create your own luck by associating with the right people, by paying attention to the right things, by learning the right things. You can always improve your ability to, first of all, notice luck and then exploit it. So there's a bit of background. So then let's talk about goal setting. Why do we want to set goals? First of all, because the process of setting goals hopefully would involve some analysis to establish reasonable goals, not fantasies, reasonable goals, which would build self-awareness about your own financial position, and would also let you understand what it's going to take throughout the course of your lives to become financially independent, which is a prerequisite to be able to stop work at some point, and you don't want to work until you die. It also builds competency and self-discipline, which is important because you're going to need that throughout your life when it comes to managing your finances. It will create targets, objectives in the future that you're going to have to think about. You're going to consider what you want for yourself, what your lifestyle is, what you want it to be, what future you want for the kids, how you want to help them, both while they're children and when they're young adults. And, what you want to do when you retire and when you want to retire. What's going to happen if things go wrong in the meantime? How much of a buffer do you need in your life? Like if you both lose your jobs, then what happens? How long do you want to be able to survive for before you think you can find another job? Most people, it's days or weeks. The majority of, if you like, working Canadians are a couple of paychecks from financial disaster. That's not abnormal, but it doesn't have to be a permanent situation. You can find your way out of that situation with a bit of thinking. Start small is the right way to approach this. If you set yourself fantasy goals, you'll never achieve them because you'll never put the right plans in place, and you'll never develop the right discipline. And the goal will be so far off, you'll forget about it. It's like, overweight person says, I'm going to lose 25 pounds by Christmas, or by the summer where I go on my holiday, I'm going to get into a bikini that's 2 sizes smaller. Never happens. However, you can establish things that are achievable in the near term. Therefore, allow yourself to both change your habits and measure progress and get some positive feedback that the things you do are actually contributing to your financial future. So I think these are reasonable goals. I will change my habits so that I can start to save. That means I will either earn more money and spend less, or I'll spend less and the same amount of money. The net being I will end up in a situation where I've got positive cash flow, where my income after taxes is more than I spend, so I've got some headroom to save. It's a reasonable goal to say, if I'm in debt, I'll get out of debt. Debt, particularly credit card debt, is a boat anchor around your neck financially. It's a trap that's very easy to get into, and everybody's encouraged to get into it, and very hard to get out of. I think another aspect of this is to not underestimate your own value. So remember, it's hard to figure out really what our value is in society. So we'll spend some time to think about that, and it's also worth spending some time to think about how do I increase my value to society and to employers so that I can get paid more for my labour and my time. Essentially, when you're working, you're trading your time and your physical or mental effort for money. If you can find ways to be more valuable, you'll get more money per unit of time that you spend. Given that time at work is a finite resource, you can't work 25 hours a day, 9 days a week, not possible. Therefore, really the only way to increase how much money you get per unit time is to increase your value. And I think seeking help is a great thing. I didn't really have any resources to rely on when I was young, which I did have in hindsight. I think I would have learned a lot more. But I think seeking help and being open about what your objectives are and getting help and guidance to, how to chase those objectives is something you should not underestimate the value of. So those things are all about how you think. But at the end of the day, you got to take action. You got to do things, and you got to change. As well as how you think. When you act, you'll put into practice some of the things that you think about, and some of the things will be successful and some won't. You'll learn the difference between what contributes to success and what contributes to failure. You'll learn to take ownership of both successes and failures. When you take ownership of your success, you'll want to repeat the things that created success. When you take ownership of failure, you'll want to avoid or at least alter the factors that contributed to your failure. But importantly, you'll take incremental steps forward towards financial independence. And again, be patient. It's not something that'll happen in 2 weeks or 2 years. It's a 20, 30-year thing. But you're young enough to have that time. And lastly, I would say on this particular context here, it can be overwhelming to think about all this and the amount of factors that you can invent that are at least partially true to get in your way. Can be overwhelming and kind of can get you paralyzed in the present and stop you from taking action and move forward. However, you got to get on with it, and you kind of got to bite that bullet and find time in your life to start thinking about this and doing something about it, because otherwise you're wasting the most important resource you've got, which is time. Personal agency. Again, the theme here is about personal responsibility. It's worth restating some of these things. This is so important. It is easy to feel trapped by circumstance. It is easy to think, well, I haven't got time to go to school. I haven't got time to learn things. I haven't got time because I'm doing this. I got the kids. I got to have some time to myself. I got a job to do. And geez, I got to cut the grass. That's all, and all that stuff is true to at least a degree. It's also therefore true that to some extent you are encumbered by circumstance, but there's always some way in which you can respond to that differently, and some way in which you can find capacity in yourself to advance towards your financial goals. It's about being conscious. It's about deliberately deciding what you're going to spend your time on and put your effort into, as opposed to, if you like, accidentally sort of bouncing through life without conscious choice being applied. And psychologically, the more that you can see that your situation is addressable by yourself, the more motivated you are to take control of things and move in a direction that you want to go in life. If you think that I have no control over anything, I'm not influencing my own outcomes, I am, if you like, a victim of circumstance and consequence, then that disempowers you as an individual to think, how can you change things? I can't possibly change things because everything's somebody else's fault, or everything is what the world is doing to me. It's a very disempowering way to think. I'm not saying you do think that way, by the way. I'm saying most people do to a degree. It's always there. And I wanted to use this example. That's something I learned years ago about this guy called Admiral James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And I'm going to read his quote. You can read it yourself. But what happened to Stockdale was he was POW in Vietnam, and you guys will be too young to remember the news on Vietnam and what happened over there. But the prisoners of war were dealt a very rough hand. They were physically and psychologically abused for years. They were kept in captivity long after the hostilities in Vietnam ended. Many of them died. Stockdale didn't. He survived, and he was interviewed, and this is the paraphrase I'll use here. Is not what's written here as a quote attributed to him, but it's essentially what he said was that, you know, the optimists, they didn't survive because their perspective was, I'll get out here by Christmas, and then they didn't, and then the next milestone they set themselves wasn't achieved, and gradually their optimism was deflated to the point where they gave up hope, and many died. Similarly, the pessimists fell into an equal but oppositely driven trap where they thought, we'll never get out here, so they gave up hope almost at the outset and succumbed. Whereas Stockdale and others like him had a perspective that said, well, I'll get out here eventually. I don't know when, and it's probably going to be shit for some time, but eventually I'll get out here. So in a sense, he was optimistic that he'd prevail in the end, but wasn't necessarily optimistic about, you know, when that would happen and how it would happen and how predictable it was. But he knew, I'll get out here in the end. And I think I use that in this course because I think financial freedom is a bit like that. It's if you're pessimistic, you'll never be motivated to take the steps you need to take in the near term towards financial freedom. If you're overly optimistic, you'll be psychologically damaged by the near term ups and downs and swings, and failure on micro milestones will erode your optimism. But if you're committed to the long term and you believe that in the long term, you know, we'll find a way to financial freedom, that'll keep you going, and it'll motivate you to take the steps that you need to take in the near term to get started. So, summary of lesson 0, which is again the scene setter, is that your current reality is your current reality. It kind of is what it is, but you can decide how you want to respond to that, and you can be proactive about changing things. You can set realistic goals to serve as a motivator and a basis for planning. Time is your friend. You've got lots of time to be successful financially and become financially independent, but you've got to do something. Gambling on the quick fix, buying the lottery tickets, buying the crazy stock that, you know, we think is going to go up 1,000% a week for the next couple of years, is just that. It's just fantasy. And apart from the, you know, the 1 in 10 million people who gets lucky on the lottery, or, you know, buys the killer stock and lives happily ever after, that's not what happens in reality. And I think biggest takeaway on this whole thing is that learning is key in your self-development and your personal growth and your maturity. These are so important. Become a consumer of knowledge about this stuff. Become a learner. Become a student of finance in life. You don't have to become an accountant. You don't have to go get an MBA. You don't have to become a PhD in some fancy aspect of finance. But there's a lot to learn that will help you form ideas and guidance for how you conduct your own life and inform some of the decisions that you're going to have to make. So become a lifelong learner and make personal finance and financial freedom an objective that you aim to. So that's lesson 0. I'll leave it at that, and join you again for the next lesson. Thanks for your attention. If you've got any questions, you want to talk about anything, you know where to find me. Bye-bye.